Join the Shot Talk Patreon at patreon.com/shottalk. You'll get access to bonus content, Q&A opportunities for future guests, and more. Thanks and enjoy.
I care more about the truth of the scene than I am about how it's crafted. Like I ultimately, I love watching beautiful animation just as much as the next animator, but I would rather have a movie not be perfectly animated, but you love the characters and you believe them and you understand them.
Hey everybody, this is Rodrigo and welcome to another episode of Shot Talk. Today I have the esteemed Ben Willis, my friend. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, thanks for having me.
So Ben, real quick intro for yourself. I know that you've been an animator at DreamWorks for what now, about 10 years at this
12
point?
years actually.
12 years, That's crazy, dude.
Probably actually in July, maybe 13. I'm gonna have to double check it.
Wow, man, so it's been, so you're quite a seasoned veteran, so to speak.
I'm an old goat. Yeah, I'm becoming part of the framework of the.
That's cool, man. Now you have a really cool story because I know that you came fresh out of school and went straight into Panda, the first Panda, right?
Yeah, technically, my very first gig, I worked at a studio called Charlex in New York City. They were working on a short film there that they'd been working on for like 10 years or so, but they were like finally like, we're gonna put a team together and do this. And so, yeah, I went down there and worked there for about 8 months. It was horrible. Long story
and you
short,
were like, I want 12 more years of this after that experience.
I mean, it was, exactly, I'm so glad I didn't leave animation after that. But, I mean, it was, the team that I worked on was great. It's just some of the more executive types.
Sure.
Without throwing too many people under the bus, there's more the executive types that
this is a reoccurring theme in this platform, I would say, but because it's a real one. But
it is absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, you need money to make these things, and so you have to deal with some of these people. You just hope that they understand the creative vision and give the creator,
Right.
But I was there for about 8 months, worked on this short, and there was a guy there who worked at DreamWorks, and he liked my stuff, so he sent it over to a buddy of his at DreamWorks, and then kind of the rest is history. They gave me a call.
Who was the buddy? Just curious. I don't know if. Is he somebody that's still there? Or?
Oh, it's awful that his name is Seth Lippmann. He was doing a lot of, I think, effects work, and he was doing some. This short had a whole bunch of it was in like a rat laboratory, but there's this one scene where there's like a ton of rats.
And you
around.
clearly were doing character animation.
Yeah.
And then cool. And
yeah.
they were like, hey, come on over.
That's one of the reasons why I took the job, because I was very fortunate that when I first graduated from school, I was offered a job at a couple of game studios.
Oh, cool.
Like Midway and whatnot, but some studios, like EA, were doing more motion capture, kind of cleanup, which is fine, but I wanted to try to gear towards keyframe if I could.
Right. I remember you told me a story a long time ago that you were in college, and that I always like to try to find that moment, because a lot of people have that, a lot of animators have that moment where they go, oh, okay, I want to do that, or I'm really interested in this. And I remember you telling me that I think it was a student project you were working on, and I believe it was a rig of the Tasmanian devil or something.
It was, I'm not a very poetic person, I wouldn't think, or dramatic person, but I will say that there was a definitive moment that I fell in love with animation. You know, not necessarily that it's like, I'll do this for the rest of my life, but I'm like, I really dig this, and I think I could do this for a while. And so the final project in my class, while I was going to Savannah College of Art and Design at the time, and just like any other college computer art student or whatever, or even any college student for that matter.
Right.
It's like 2 a.m. You know what I mean? Like everybody's in the same hall together, like eating McDonald's and just trying to all you're hearing is the hum of the computers and the clicks of the.
And you've been up since the last 2 a.m.
Yeah, exactly. It's there's been a whole 48 hours here, and the final project for me was I had modeled a Tasmanian devil, because they had given us a number of things, like you could model a battleship or you could model a city, and I was like, I don't want to. Yeah.
Boring.
But one of them was Tasmanian devil. I was like, you're not talking the real one. We're talking like Warner
Looney
Brothers,
Tunes,
right? Looney Tunes, right? And they're like, yeah, that one. I was like, oh, perfect. So I struggled through that, and I downloaded a free rig online, and I remember painting weights was awful. But when I finally started animating, I was like, I had to do a walk cycle and a jump, And the part that you were talking about, I was trying to shift around a bunch of keys, and I was trying to do a walk cycle, and I had this Mel script that was like automatically putting the hips halfway in between the feet. So it's like if you move that foot, it'll like and
it'll compensate for it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, especially as a student, I was like, oh yeah, of course I'd want that. That's like, you know, I'm like that would make my job easier, not knowing that like how much counter animating work I would have to do. You know what I mean? Because you don't always want the weight to be halfway in between. Anyway, so I was fiddling around with a bunch of keys, and I sort of had the walk, but it wasn't looking quite right. And I just quickly grabbed a bunch of keys and like slid them down the timeline. And I think I had forgotten the hips control and like the arms. And the arms, I don't know, I was animating a walk cycle forward and with IK arms as well.
Yeah.
So there was that.
Okay.
It was a big learning experience for me. But what ended up happening was that I had moved everything else along, but all that was left behind were the hands and the hips. And so he ended up doing this kind of like hip thrusting, like, you know what I mean? And it's like, especially when you're delirious at 3 a.m. in the morning,
the best time.
You're sitting there and I was like, I just burst out laughing because, you know, I'm tired and I'm just trying to get this project done. And then,
you see all that setup and you hit play.
And just like Taz is just going like this. And I was like, oh shit. And then I like
Said Fred
turn my monitor and I'm like, and then of course my friend starts laughing too.
But it feels like there's always that moment, like I even hear stand-up comics talk about it, where it's like you get that super strong reaction out of either yourself or like an audience or something, and it's like, man, there's something really fulfilling and fun about that, right?
Absolutely.
That makes you want to go back for more, right? Like,
absolutely, yeah. And it's like I said, I don't usually have a moments like that too often, and
oh, you mean just like regular work-wise, like
just in life in terms of like, oh my, like an epiphany of like, oh my god, I think I can do this like forever sort of thing, and I was definitely
you
like
have animation, you have your wife, and that's pretty much it.
That's all. Yeah, that's all I need. And my cats.
Your cats.
And my cats. Yeah.
But I was gonna say it's pretty crazy going from New York to Glendale, and did they start you on shot work, or were you doing like cycles, or like how? What was that transition like? That must have been pretty crazy, going all the way to the other side of the country, right?
I mean, the trip itself was pretty crazy because I had my old '89 Saab Turbo that my mom had given me, and I was living in New York City at Charlex, like I was mentioning, and my mom had come up to pick me up, pack everything I had into my Saab, and then the two of us actually drove cross country.
Oh, that's fun.
From New York City all the way to Los Angeles. I know, in the middle of summer, and the Saab. It's that old joke that it's like it's a sob story because as we were coming across the country, like the car would constantly like break down, and a lot of times we're like in the middle of the desert or in the middle of nowhere, and I'm there just with like my mom and like I don't know, and there was this one time where the car broke down and I could feel that it was waning, and like the power was waning, and I pulled off this road, and just as it quit on me, I was rolling across the road right into a little car repair shop that was there.
Great.
I was like, thank you, God.
I was thinking a cliff or something.
No,
and I was like,
this
is insane.
No, it's not going to be that
I'm glad you're here.
Yeah. Mom, yeah, no. No. And then it was somewhere in like Indiana or something like that, and I saw the car mechanic like open up the hood, and he looked at the engine like I would. Like he was like, I've never seen the inside of one of these before. And in my mind, I was like, it's a car like any other car, but I guess Saabs are unique. But anyway,
these fancy cars from New York.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I guess, and apparently they're kind of like an East Coast car, I guess. But eventually we made it all the way over to Glendale, and then Mom flew back. But starting at DreamWorks, I was part of the outreach program, which I don't think we technically have anymore, but we're still trying to do like internships, so keeping, because you still want new talent to continually come in and bring their fresh ideas and their energy, because we're all jaded and tired now.
Right.
But they started me right away on shots, but what happened was that with the outreach program, it was, I signed a 4-year contract, which is kind of crazy thinking about it, but really it was like a 6-month trial period, where you work as an animator and you get paid, the minimum, the union minimum, but you still are getting paid as an animator, and you're getting full-on shots, and you show your shots to the director. So it's like you go through the whole pipeline.
It's exciting.
And you don't, the main stipulation is that obviously you've got a mentor, and they're kind of like watching and seeing how you do. But also on top of that, you don't technically have quota. So they're not putting the pressure on you that like all the other animators would have. They just want you to do a good job.
For you, what was that like? I mean, you step into the campus, you get your first assignment. Like, what do you do to mentally get yourself, I guess, ready or prepared, or like, well, what's that thought process?
The day before, because I was staying in temporary housing, so because like they put you up in a temporary housing until you find an apartment. So I was still staying in this like hotel, and I had set up my computer quickly, like taking it out of my sob and like put it all together. And like the day before, I was like panicking in the sense that I was like, I don't even know if I know how to do a walk cycle. So I sat there and animated like a walk cycle, and I was like,
remembering Taz in your head.
Yeah, as if I was going to show up on the first day, and they're like, Ben, you know what I mean? Like quickly, you know, what are the 4 phases of like a walk cycle? I'm like, passing contact. I don't, you know. No, I had a little moment like that at the beginning where I was like, I'm just going to animate just a little something, just so I can remind myself that I can still do this.
Yeah, totally.
And because,
how was that walk? Did you think it was pretty good?
Oh no, it was awful. It was awful. And I got really discouraged, and then went to, I think I went to like, this is the second time I'm bringing up McDonald's. It's as if I go to McDonald's super often. But yeah, I went.
High stress times, man.
I got to get out. Yeah, that's my stress food. But you know, when I got there, everybody was super welcoming and understanding, and they didn't really put any pressure on me in terms of like, you know, you got to perform or you got to do whatever.
It's cool.
They're just like, just take advantage of this opportunity, and you know, it was one of those where, for those 6 months at least, I was like, I'm just gonna work my butt off and try to do the best I can, and kind of leave it up to that. Like if they don't dig it at the end of it, then so be it. At least we got the opportunity. But I mean, it is an intimidating environment, because when you go there, I mean, a lot of those artists they're like some of the best in the world. I mean, arguably. So to be surrounded by that many people who really know what they're talking about and do beautiful work, and then you got to put your stuff up like next to, like, you know, because I'm still showing it daily, so Dan Wagner would go show his shot, and everybody laughs and stuff, and then here's Ben,
the new guy,
you know, showing his stuff. So
I will say though, in my experience, anyways, it feels that sometimes the most able, talented people are usually the most generous and humble and willing to share.
Yeah, absolutely.
More often than not, it feels anyways. And even with the few chances I've had to run into like a film director on the campus, you know, usually if it's a guy like Mark Dindal or something, like he's always the most, you know, gregarious, nice person. And then maybe a film that wasn't as good as like the stuff that he would make. You know, you'd run into like someone who was pretty closed off and pretty egotistical. So, but when you're talking about describing how you were surrounded by really, really badass animators, it made me think it makes sense that they wanted you to succeed. They wanted you to like come on up to where they were, right? Like,
absolutely. And I think those are like, that's where you want to be. I feel like as an artist, you know, as long as you because at least the way DreamWorks is the way it's set up, it's a very collaborative environment, you know what I mean, where we're always looking at each other's work and giving each other feedback and asking for feedback. And I think that does two things. I think it keeps you humble, you know what I mean, because you're always getting feedback and always having to listen to criticism. And B, I think, you know, ultimately it's going to make your work better. You know, it should make your work better. And ultimately, for me with animation, all that matters is what ends up on that screen. You know what I mean? And the idea is that if we're all doing a great job, and and especially like Hokas and leaders, you know, the better their team does, not only does the better the film look, but ultimately they look better. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you've led this team that's done amazing work. You know what I mean? Like it's never going to look bad on you. You know what I mean? If other people succeed and do a great job. You know? As
a supervisor now, that is, because I know, as a shot animator, you watch a film and all of a sudden you go, oh, there's that thing that I looked at for 6 weeks. It really it pops out like a sore thumb. But now, is it a different experience for you now that I guess you're overlooking sequences now, or what's the difference there? But in terms of the film experience, I'm guessing you're looking at more than just your shot now at this point, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely. And there's a little bit more. I don't want to say ownership, but there's a little, like I've had a little bit more impact on something. So for instance, especially at DreamWorks, it depends on the film, but usually there's a mix of, like you'll be a sequence lead, so you have a team of maybe 4 to 5 animators that you're kind of tracking all the animation over the course of a sequence, trying to make sure that we're catching the director's vision, you know, for the sequence. So I'm kind of, not that I'm a mini director, that's saying too much, but it's kind of like I'm trying to help maintain the director's vision for
you do have to wear that hat sometimes, because sometimes the director is having the more broad stroke ideas, and then even in a sequence, you are still looking at you know, medium-sized strokes, I guess, which is sort of a directorial type position, right?
That's true. So, that's a fair point. I think, you of course we're thinking about composition, we're thinking about pacing, we're thinking about the emotion, which is all stuff that
the
directors
director
are
thinks
thinking
about.
And the other thing that sometimes happens at DreamWorks, especially being a supervisor, is a lot of times we'll have a character, or in the case of like Trolls 2 that I'm working on right now, I'll be in charge of like a tribe.
Cool.
Or a group of characters and that sort of thing.
That's your ensemble, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And so, there's only so much I can do to like keep track of multiple characters, but in the same sense, I do try to help maintain the style. So in that sense, it goes a little bit beyond the sequence. And when I'm watching a film, yes, I mean they still expect me to do a good number of quotas, so I am still animating shots, but definitely much more focus in my mind is about the bigger picture, or about having a little bit more impact over the course of a few sequences or characters.
Since you started obviously doing shots to begin with, when you're giving notes or feedback, how does that inform the way you try to get to your team? Like, because you're obviously speaking to someone who's struggled with the same stuff that you've struggled with, right? So I'm guessing, does that impact the way your style, I guess, with getting ideas across to the people that you work with? Like,
I mean,
that kind of stuff.
I don't know if this is answering your question, but I think that, there's a reason why you usually the people that get hired for these positions have some experience. You know what I mean? Because you've gone through a lot of these trials and you've done a lot of these things and you've solved a lot of things. Not that you have all the answers for every particular scene. In fact, that was one of the biggest things I needed to be okay with myself was the idea that like I don't always have to have the answer.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
Or I don't always have to know what the right acting choice is, which is a relief in some senses, but it's also something that you very much have to like let go and not worry about. Because there can be a misconception that a supervisor is a master of, or a head of animation is a master of all these things and always knows the answer. It's like, no, we're all trying to figure this out together. But
sometimes the directors don't even know.
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of it is I've definitely turned a little bit more into the role of what can I do to help my animator create the best performance. And a lot of times, quite literally, it means not telling them what to do specifically. You know what I mean? There's a general, and I mean that even not. That sounds kind of micromanagey, like telling them what to do. But there's kind of like, well, the character should be happy. You should come over here and sit down. It's still kind of general, and you give them freedom for that. But a lot of times, I just kind of leave, however they were launched by the director, to interpret how they want. And if they have some questions, they can always ask me, and I can give them what I think, or I give them some feedback. But for the most part, I am trying to help them bring whatever, because all the animators that we have there have unique talents and have different ideas and things that I would have never thought of. You know what I mean? That could be way better than any idea that I would have come up with.
There's a reason that they got through the admission process.
Absolutely. Like, and especially now at DreamWorks, since we've unfortunately had to let go of a bunch of people and we've been trimmed down, I feel like even more of like an elite group than we were before. You know
super
what I mean?
lean,
Yeah, super lean, and everybody who's there, the vast majority of those people could be supervisors.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So, so sometimes I'm even supervising like a Hoka or on Boss Baby. It was a weird moment because I sat across the hall from him, but James Baxter, I'm going off on a tangent.
Oh yeah, no. This is okay. Listen, James Baxter stories are awesome.
Okay.
I'm always happy to hear those.
So James sat across the hall. He's no longer at DreamWorks, but he sat across the hall from me, and we were working on Boss Baby, and I was one of the last supervisors to be brought on. And so I was given like 2 or 3 sequences. Anyway, James he was just animating on the show until he moved on to whatever his next project was. But he was then put on my team. And there was this like almost like out of body experience the first time I went across the hall to go, because I was going to give him some notes, some feedback on his shot, which is weird to think of as well.
You're like, hey, Roger Rabbit's was really cool.
Everything,
by the way,
exactly. Everything was sandwiched with like, by the way, Rafiki's performance, I studied your rough in-betweens. Anyway, could you just lower the arm here just a little bit? Love Hunchback. Like totally mesmerized by the performance. Also, could you lift his smile just could you make the expression a little? And anyway, and then I end it with like, anyway, love you, bye. You know what I mean, sort of thing. But it's like, as I walked into his room to give him the notes, all those memories of like studying his work and not even thinking I would meet him one day, let alone work with them or supervise him for a shot. All those memories were like flashing through my head as I'm like taking each step to like walk closer to him.
But I think that's a testament to the fact that, like we were talking about earlier, like there's a certain type of person that goes to DreamWorks. And actually, this is something that I talked to Joe Bowers about when he worked with Glenn Keane on Tangled. And oftentimes, even the best of them, it's just being too close to the work and having just a second person come in, even somebody who may not even be an artist necessarily, and be like, there's something funny about that. I don't know, I can't pick it apart, but this needs to be pushed, or this needs to be this and that. But because you have obviously a trained eye for that, then it's not so weird for you to go in and be like, hey, you know, Supreme Lord Baxter, this could be plus this way, or we don't want to do this too much, etc. So
and
that is pretty surreal though. Either way,
it is. And like I said, I remember earlier, like when I got to DreamWorks, my brother Chris had said something to me, like he's like, walk in like you're gonna own the place someday, but not necessarily like in a cocky way, but like, you know, but be confident. You know what I mean? And what you know. And I wanted so badly to progress in my career and become a supervisor and maybe eventually a Hoka and that sort of thing. And I realized that like I had said earlier, that there's a reason why you need that experience before you go and do those things. And in a way, now that I'm a supervisor, I'm so glad that I've had
those trials.
The trials before that. Because I was an animator for 10, if you include Charlex, 11 years or so before I was promoted. And I can now trust in those feelings or in those intuitions, right? And I can trust also that, and that's why I was saying a big part of my journey, especially as a supervisor, is learning that humility, or learning this idea that I don't have to do more than what I need to do, if it makes sense. Like I don't have to have all the answers. I don't have to solve everything.
I think I remember it was Gabe. Oh, what was his last name? Hordos. I remember he put it in a good way. It's talking about how everybody who's here is here because they were very ambitious. There's no other reason why everybody send a demo reel to places like DreamWorks and Pixar. But that's a pretty loaded personality that you have there. So I think that speaks to the fact that somebody who, the type of personality that tries to get to one of these studios is the type of person that's usually pretty hard on themselves and put a lot of expectations on themselves, and they tend to over prepare. They tend to do extra than other students would do because they're trying to get ahead and achieve a lot in life. So I think so when you talk about coming to that sort of maybe more of a Zen place as a supervisor, because you start to realize that it doesn't have to be a sprint the entire time. That you can take those marathons, if you will, like those at a slower pace.
And exactly. Perfect.
We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later.
We can get into running stories.
That's another thing an ambitious person might do, is they might train for or actually participate in the marathon.
Well, I think I think that's true, because everybody who's there, and like I was saying earlier, that more than half of them could be supervisors that aren't already, and all of them are hard workers. You know what I mean? And they trust in the sensibilities that got them there. You know what I mean? So there's always going to be some butting heads and that sort of thing. But you always need to leave the door open to be wrong, or to let someone trusting in someone to see something through, or to trust that they will work out a good solution. I mean, it might not be the right solution or whatever, but or
the one that you wanted specifically.
That I wanted specifically, you know what I mean? Or sometimes even that the director wanted specifically. But occasionally there's a time where you go, you know what? You feel really strongly about this. See it through, and then it's not going to be the end of the world if you have to redo something or whatever. And that's another job that I feel like as a supervisor, I try to, I don't want to say protect my animators, but at the same time, take whatever heat is my responsibility.
Oh, sure,
you know what I mean? So if they're not finishing their quota on time, part of that is on me because they're like, Ben, you got to make sure that you're telling them this, that, and the other thing, but they also, the studio also knows that, sometimes animators just go slower or they go through ups and downs and in terms of their productivity but
that's a refreshing thing to hear because unfortunately we know of a lot of people who've thrown their team under the bus and for selfish reasons, obviously. So it is nice to hear that is something that is in the forefront of your process.
Oh yeah, for me it was like, it's about kind of the balance of the world. Not to be too like big and grand about it, but it's like to me a leader. Like if someone was to ask me like what I think a good leader does.
What defines that? Yeah.
So for instance, you have the reason why we pay our leaders more money and they give them the corner office, and the reason why we're okay with that is because similar to like and this might be too simplified of a view of it, but similar to like a lion's pride, when you have the alpha lion that protects the pride, and then you got a bunch of other lions that are under him. When there's a kill, like a lot of times it's like, if we're talking about lions, the females will go out, kill,
right.
But a lot of times they will let the alpha or the main like boss lion come and eat first and have the first pick of it. But the reason for that is because when danger comes to the pride, he's throwing his life on the line to protect.
He's burning calories, literally.
Exactly. Yeah. He's throwing his life, and he's going to sacrifice his life if he needs to for the team, and that sort of thing.
That's cool.
And as much as I can, I try to think about what a good leader would do, or what kind of leader I would want to follow, or and that obviously includes like never throwing somebody under the bus, you know what I mean, sort of thing, or taking responsibility when it's my fault or responsibility for something, or also making sure that if an animator is feeling pressure in a certain regard, and I know that pressure might hinder their work or hurt their work, because I mean, we do need to have deadlines, we need to have some kind of pressure, otherwise artists would never complete anything.
Right, no, yeah.
But I need to make sure that I will talk to management and make sure that they're not worried about quota. I'll take the heat for the quota. You just keep doing what you're doing. You know what I mean? Because I need you to do that.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it's different. And the other thing, the biggest thing that has been a learning curve for me is that everybody is different and they communicate differently.
Oh, yes.
Some people, I hate compliment sandwich. You know what I mean? I hate the where you come over and you're kind of like, I really like what you did with this choice here. Do you think you could change that? But overall, the piece is feeling really nice.
That's
you know what
interesting.
I mean? Like you're
so
like,
for people who don't know, that's a technique that for creative leads like yourself, that they'll say, you lead in with a compliment. So that way they kind of lower their defenses and they're more receptive to what you're going to say. And then you say, fix that shit, and then you end it on an up, almost like a demo reel.
Exactly. It is.
But yeah, that's interesting that so you're not a big fan of that then, like you'd rather just cut to the chase. Yeah,
because for me, critiques especially, it's not personal. To me, it's like it's. I know our art can be very personal because on display are our decisions and our sensibilities, and
it's pretty personal sometimes.
It can be.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's. But especially at a place like DreamWorks, where we're really making somebody else's film. You know what I mean? We're not the directors of the film, and not that we don't have ownership of the film, and that we this isn't our film as well. But it's not our vision, per se. And so we have to always cater to what the director wants, for that particular scene. So whenever I'm giving feedback, in my mind, it's never a personal thing because we're just talking about the work. I never think less of somebody because of a choice that they made or something, and so for me it's always there. So whenever I go to talk to somebody, I'm just expecting they're there with me because I feel like I don't have a lot of time for BS. I just personally, even not just at work, but in general, I don't have much time for it.
Like the older you get, man, you just have less time for it. Yeah.
You just, you understand your grandfather now. You're like, I get why he was just spouting shit because he doesn't have time for anything else.
Right. Exactly.
He's dying. We gotta
So just something about that lion analogy. I'm imagining you walking into James Baxter's office and picking up his sandwich and just taking a big bite of it,
just eating it,
just putting it right back down.
That would have been awesome, just spitting it out. You don't mind if or just taking it, actually.
I'm protecting you, all right?
Yeah, that's right. Just
in case.
I think there's some people who can take that stuff, and then there are some people who can take the more blunt, and then there's some people that obviously need the compliment sandwich. And I've had to realize that like it's okay, and it's not necessarily, there's nothing inherently wrong with giving like the compliment sandwich, because it's just how
technique.
Yeah, it's technique, and it's working with people, and it's trying to get the best result out of your. It's not manipulative. It's just trying to understand where the person's coming from and how they communicate. Because I have other animators that are super anxious, fantastic animators, super anxious, and never believe in their work.
Sure.
And are always doubting themselves, and I mean,
so that
I'm
makes
not
it
a therapist, so I can't do everything to ease
I guess
their fears.
it's
But, you know.
sort of secretly in your job description maybe, but that probably makes it a little bit easier than if somebody already has a receptive spirit to be like, I don't like any of it, and you say, well, you know, let me lift you up and let me show you where you can go with this or whatever. But yeah, you know, it's funny because I'll tell you, I'm sure it's not just exclusive to artists, but yeah, we tend to get pretty or potentially get pretty personal with what we put into in the work, but I think the sign of a mature artist is to know that there's a difference between, you can separate, you can compartmentalize like the work and then the person, and you go, even though I'm only here to service the story, I'm only here to service the product, I'm only here to service, and I have to have that distance. So and if you don't, it's best to learn that early, because otherwise it gets real tough, especially in a team situation when you're
And for me, I feel like that's why we try so hard at DreamWorks to keep up a collaborative environment, because that's the only way I know to combat it within myself. You know what I mean? Is to constantly get that feedback and to constantly not think too highly of whatever it is I'm doing, because I find that times when I lock myself away in my office and I'm animating on something for a few days, and whether I know it or not, I'm kind of expecting people to go like, yeah, this looks really great, you know what I mean? Or I'm expecting, you know, and really all I've done is like shielded myself from any helpful criticism or any help. And so a lot of times I find that, you know, I have to get my animation, especially when I block it out, to a place that I think is understandable, or it's clear, or it's coherent. Because I need the person to actually understand, like I need to actually articulate my vision well enough so that they can understand what I'm going for. But then after that, I try my best to show as soon as I can, so that I can stay in that place of like, oh, that's right, I'm not like the end all be all of animation. That's right. I don't always know, you know, the right choice. Or
when you say to show, you mean like,
or to get feedback.
To get feedback,
sort of
right.
Yeah. Not necessarily from the director, but from other animators and that sort
do you
of
have
thing.
Do you have a technique to sort of figure out which feedback to pay attention to and which feedback to not pay attention to? Because I know that is something that we all probably have our own way of doing that.
I think if the feedback doesn't help me to go for what my intent is. You always keep the stuff in mind as like possible alternatives, but if I have a specific intent that I'm going for before I show the director, unless for some reason someone has convinced me that my intent, you know what I mean, what I'm going for is like completely off base, but if people didn't understand what I was going for, and they give me feedback like that, or if there's a note that I really disagree with, but a number of people have given me that same note, I'll probably give that a little bit more consideration and possibly, you know, put that in. But there are going to be times where, I don't know, there's just going to be times where you put something in and you're never going to see what like the rest of the people see for whatever it is. So there are times where, if the director gives me certain feedback, or if a number of people have given me a repeated note about something, then I'm kind of like, all right, even though I don't understand it or I don't completely agree, I should probably address this, because I'm now trusting, you know what I mean, that I'm kind of blind to this.
Right,
bit, you know?
right. You're trusting your team at that point.
But for the most part, I try my best to just trust my instincts or trust my gut, and try my best to remove my personal feelings from it as much as possible.
Right.
You know what I mean? So instead of kind of like, well, I just really like this, so I don't really want to change that. It's not that there's something wrong specifically with that, because it could still be the right choice, but at the same time, just trying to be as like objective as possible.
That is
striving for that.
That is survival, though, in a team situation. I mean, and because these movies require obviously so many different types of talented people. I mean, it's not a two-man job, obviously. Right. So that is something that you have to cope and compromise sometimes and deal with, to make sure that, like, at least let's keep like the army marching forward at this point. Otherwise, why be the squeaky wheel that might not
Absolutely.
help, for the bigger picture or whatever. So.
Absolutely. And I know I had mentioned it earlier, but it really is my mantra of all that matters is what ends up on screen.
Right.
And to me, all animation really is. I mean, you could talk about principles, you could talk about entertaining choices or acting choices or whatever, but really, for me, it boils down to what is the audience supposed to feel when they see your work or see the shot on the screen. And that has to be your priority. That has to be your guide for everything. You know what I mean?
No, I think that speaks volumes, because there's obviously so many different types of animation out there, and DreamWorks does a certain kind of thing, but like you can get away with like having a lower frame rate, but as long as the audience is getting that feeling, like with like a 2D drawing, even like that's the ultimate goal is the specificity of the emotion that you're trying to get the person to feel. Absolutely.
I think maybe what you're alluding to is like anime and that sort of thing, where they can have cells that they've held, but you feel the emotion for whatever reason it's right to convey that idea, and that in itself, compared to like our animation, typical American animation, which is usually on ones, that what works for animation and what communicates emotion is much broader, than we would normally think.
Right.
Especially when if you're working in the industry here.
It's tricky. That's a tricky thing to think about, because by the very nature of the job of animator, it requires you to sort of be in a tunnel and sort of see the,
small, like
frame by frame by frame. It's very, very micro polish level that you get to. So to sort of reel yourself back from that and be like, okay, what have I done? What is this whole thing? Like that is something,
And that's a constant process for me. You know what I mean? That's, to me, that the check is always when you come back out. You know what I mean? To recenter to why it is we're even doing what we're doing.
Do you find that if you take a step back for like a day or two, and maybe you work on a different shot and you come back, or even just mirroring it, like does that help sort of give you fresh eyes, I guess?
Absolutely. Usually I don't have. Unfortunately, I don't always have the luxury to be able to take time off from shots, but that is a very helpful technique. Like if I was an animator and I was given because usually we do like a chunky style, so an animator is given like 10 shots in a row sort of thing, and you can kind of, work on certain parts of that chunk at a time, so you can leave things to to then come back and look at. I think that's a really useful technique. What I do the most is I show people that I trust.
Yeah.
The work that's going on.
Yeah.
I think it was John Cleese who had this talk on creativity. I don't know if you'd ever seen it. Did you ever see that?
Maybe. I love the guy, so
he's awesome. I mean, those Monty Python guys and everything, they were brilliant.
That's also a recurring theme on Shot Talk.
Is it really Monty Python?
Yes.
Okay. All right,
People allude to them a lot.
They're fantastic, especially when you go back to look at. I mean, some of their humor is like timeless. I swear. You know what I mean? It's not. We
were talking about earlier before we started recording how it takes a really smart person to make the best stupid comedy.
Yeah.
Because you can feel it if it's a dumb person making dumb comedy.
If it's just dumb, then it's dumb. You're kind of like, okay, well, fine.
But it takes sometimes a very sophisticated mind, like Cleese, to do what he does.
Or like the Old Spice commercials, where it's like when the first Old Spice commercials came out, it's like it's super stupid, but it's hilarious, but it hits just right. And then you see a bunch of other companies try to like
be internet
hit
weird,
that same thing, and you're kind of like, nah, I think this is just weird. But it's hard to also tell like why.
It is, isn't it? It's
be an
strange how it doesn't come off.
About.
It's kind of esoteric, where it's like, why am I laughing at that monkey sniffing his butt and that monkey sniffing his butt? I hate it.
Right.
Like, what's the difference?
Exactly. Is it the timing? Is it the? But the. What were
I don't know why I think monkey
okay.
sniffing his butt either.
So John Cleese. There we go. I was like, how did we even get here?
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
It's great.
Did that mental image throw you off?
I would love to go this tangent. I would love to go this tangent.
Let's finish that thought.
But I feel like I have much more meaningful things to contribute in another area.
Sure.
Not that the conversation is meaningless. But John Cleese would talk about creativity in the sense that he believes creativity, and I agree that creativity is a state of being rather than like a talent that you're born with innately. Because a number of people will be like, I'm not creative.
Oh, right,
I just don't believe that, because anybody, like even members of my own family, they're like, no, I'm not creative, but I've seen them draw, or I've seen them write, or I've seen them do something, and I'm kind of like, that's creativity. So, but he believes it's a state of being rather than an innate talent, and he says that there are two modes. There's an open and a closed mode. And the open mode is kind of a lot of times more like the brainstorm session that you have. Like initially when you come onto a project and you start bouncing ideas, usually what you want to do is you want to be with other people. That's one of the main things he was outlining, which I agree, because it's kind of what we were talking about. Like, how are we going to get the best idea? It's like we get the best idea when we have, you know, brilliant minds, like brilliant people, like all working on it together, or people that you trust. And that's the second thing, is that it has to be people that you trust, and you have to give yourself this time to throw out any and all ideas, no matter how ridiculous. It's like you're not even worrying about what ideas you're going to use, and it does sometimes take work and effort to enter that area, because it's very easy for us a lot of times to just go like, oh, this is the first idea off the top of my head. Yeah, it sounds pretty funny, and then it's hard to deviate from that.
Or you think, oh, people are going to eat this one up. It's easy. I'll just do that. Versus really considering the possibilities. Right?
Yeah, and that's why it also has to be a safe place where you have trusted people, because, you know, if you're there with people who would shut you down or would maybe make fun of you while you're going through this phase, it's like it hurts your ability to be open.
It kills it. Yeah.
And so you are in this open period, and then you switch over to this closed period, and the closed period of creativity is where you sift through, pick out what you think is the best idea to go with, and then you just execute from there. And he said the best artists that he knows are able to go between the closed and open modes quickly, in the sense that, you know, they're working along and something's not working, and then they can go to the open mode and explore until they find an idea, and they're like, yep, okay, and then we're going to execute that idea and put it down. And
by the way, that's just to add to that, that's kind of what I feel is a big difference sometimes between animation and live action, where in animation, you know, we have the luxury of sort of having everything pre-planned, but sometimes when you're a live action on a set or something, you sort of have to go between those phases of open and closed.
Absolutely.
Where it's like, okay, suddenly we have this new element, or we don't have a certain element.
Absolutely.
So it's time to open up again and I guess improvise, right? Figure out what to do at that point.
Yeah, that's a good point, especially because animation is such a long process, and it's kind of arduous in that sense that we don't flip between that nearly as often, especially as an actor or a director on set, where you're like, oh, we got to come up with another solution. So you have to be free.
Yeah.
To think of whatever.
You have to switch that mode, right?
Exactly. Because when you're in that closed mode, it's not, you know what I mean? It's more, you need to be in that closed mode so your brain's not distracted by all the other possibilities that this thing could be. You're just in this mode of like, I trust the decision we made, and now I'm just focusing on how I make it and how I present it in the best
Which
way.
is nice about animation, because I know that's something that Brad Bird talked about when, I know some guys at DreamWorks who worked on the Iron Giant, and they talk about how they sat down and saw the movie from start to end in animatic form, and they were like, oh, we now know confidently that we're making a good movie, so let's just get to it.
Yeah.
And then Brad Bird talks about how the first time he made a live action film, Mission Impossible 4, and sort of, you know, reflecting on that process and the differences between animation and that is like, he said, I noticed that I had to sort of think on my feet a lot.
Yeah.
Because you're tied to your circumstances once you're actually on set and shooting and everything. So.
Oh yeah, and you only have those few days or whatever it is, or the set or the lighting at that particular time.
Right.
Actually, what's funny about Mission Impossible 4 is I feel like if you watch that film, it's shot completely, like I feel like you could tell this was the director of Incredibles.
Oh yeah.
Like there's even, I think at the very beginning of the film, where an identification of like an agent comes up, and it's like the tablet is sitting on the ground and the camera is looking up, and then it pans over and looks down at the thing. And not that they don't ever do that in live action, but that felt like a very animated movie move.
I don't know what it is about his movies. He's only made 2 live action ones so far, but it does feel like I can't help but notice the camera moves. Yeah. And there's something about, and that maybe that's not a good thing, but it is. Right. In either case, I enjoyed, at least Mission Impossible was good. Yeah. But it feels, I don't know if it's a matter of it being a little too stagey or something, but
I think
you feel it, right?
That's what my impression was.
You feel that, right?
A little stagey, but yeah, it's true. Like, I love David Fincher, but even David Fincher has some moves that are very like, they're like impossible camera moves. So it's hard for you not to notice that. Like, you know,
for sure.
In like Gone Girl, he'll go between like there's a little teacup, I think, and he goes through the handle of the teacup into something. Yeah. And it's hard for me not to go like, okay, this is a fake camera, or they did some effect here, you know.
I had that realization, and I didn't know like the proper terminology for it, the impossible camera, but when I watched The Matrix Reloaded, being a huge fan of the first one, And there's something about that movie that sort of gives it the liberty to be like, well, listen, this is supposed to be fake or whatever.
It's a fake world, isn't it?
But there was still tension though.
Yeah.
But I noticed in the second one, specifically the highway chase scene, there's a scene where the camera flies right through the 18-wheeler, and I was bored to tears. I was like, I don't understand why I'm not invested anymore.
Right.
But part of it, I think, too, was the fact that the camera was invincible, and I just suddenly wasn't that scared anymore, I guess.
Yeah.
So
if you don't feel, I think, the weight of things, or if you don't feel, I feel like if you don't set up certain, I mean, I think sometimes it's good to set up certain rules of like how you're going to tell a story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And when the camera feels that willy-nilly, you know, or it's just kind of doing whatever, that it can be easy to just be like, sure, all right, whatever, I guess we're doing, you know what I mean? Like you don't feel grounded as a viewer, like in terms of a language of any sort. You're just watching things happen, you know what I mean, in front of you. You know, what's funny is, to me, going back to like what I feel like animation is all about in terms of what ends up on screen that matters, or what is it the audience feels. I think this is where I feel like sometimes I'm like an old man, like a curmudgeon-y like old man in animation already, is that, and maybe this is too much to say, I feel like sometimes animators lose connection with their audience more often than they think, in the sense that because animation is so hard, you're spending so much time doing this stuff, and you have to understand the principles so much, and you need to understand acting, and like you there's so many things that you're trying to juggle and balance, and you're crafting every single frame, that it's easy to get lost in the craft of it. And I think even audiences, to a certain degree, because they realize that animation is a handcrafted, you know, every frame either is drawn or a puppet's moved, or they understand how much care goes into it. So I think they also really appreciate really flashy, nice animation. But I find more often than not, animators can be convinced that something is animated really well just because it moves beautifully.
Interesting.
Or it's got some interesting acting choices. But there are some times where you'll listen to the line of dialogue that the character is actually speaking, and then you start to realize, if you looked at it objectively, a lot of times those, the way the character's moving and the gestures they're doing don't match the audio, or don't match the intent of the dialogue.
The energy or something.
Yeah, it could be the energy, or it could just be the actual emotion that is supposed to be portrayed there. And I know we always talk about like, oh, make sure you don't like over gesture, but I do find that people are still really impressed with beautiful animation from a really technical standpoint. And,
I gotcha.
And for me, I think sometimes I believe that the intent of the acting and what goes up on screen, I believe in it so much that I think sometimes maybe it actually like hurts my work, because I feel like my work probably could be more, if I was to critique myself, I feel like my work could be more entertaining. But I lean into believability.
I gotcha.
Of the emotion and of the scene more than I do about making the most interesting choices possible, or having the most fluid movement, or the most interesting poses.
Interesting.
You know, I mean, obviously I am thinking about the craft of it, so I am still crafting my poses, but probably not as much as I could, or...
well, it's interesting. It's a shift of priorities for you at this point.
Yeah.
Like, and I guess some people would consider that going from broad to more believable, right?
Yeah.
Is sort of in a nutshell that shift. And I've noticed that happens again with experience. That happens with guys who sometimes they'll hit the outer limits of a certain style and be like, okay, well, I feel like I've done as much as I can this way, and I've gotten what I need out of this, and I can use some of that for then that informs like maybe what you're focusing on now, which is that more of a sincerity, that's sort of a believability that you're talking about.
I fear sometimes it sounds a little like snobby of me or whatever, but but it's true. I care more about the truth of the scene than I am about how it's crafted. Like I ultimately love watching beautiful animation just as much as the next animator, but I would rather have a movie not be perfectly animated, but you love the characters and you believe them and you understand them. That's where I'm okay sacrificing the mechanics or the perfection of it there to get that. But at the same time, I also still believe, like, I'm still pushing my work to be more entertaining, you know, because I think there is validity to that, especially when I think about, so for instance, one of my favorite actors is like Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And I think one of the reasons why I like him so much and why I would say confidently that he's a great actor, because he'll give you the believability. So like believability in the sense that you believe that he's a living, breathing, actual like character, and that he's reacting honestly and believably to things that are happening to him or that he's doing to others. And so you have that believability factor, and the sense that like, yeah, that makes sense to me that a character would do that.
I'm convinced, yeah.
I'm convinced, but then there's that other aspect where he's made it interesting and entertaining in the sense that he found something about the character, whether it's through his timing or his posing or how he's choosing to inflect his voice. Because like you can see, like whether it's There'll Be Blood or Gangs of New York or Lincoln, like he will change to like someone completely different. You know?
Did you see The Phantom Thread, the last thing
I have not yet.
Okay, you should watch it.
Okay, all right, definitely. Am I going to pull this back after? I'll be like,
no.
Awful.
It's only solidifying everything that you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing for me is that he does, I think, and I think that's probably why Meryl Streep is so great as well. Is that like I feel like they do such a great job of, they've mastered the believability, and they've also made it super entertaining and interesting to watch. Yeah. And that to me is that's like,
the ideal, right?
Yeah,
that's what you want to hit.
And the tricky thing I think also about believability is that what actors are concerned about, which obviously animators should be concerned about as well, because we are essentially the actors.
Right. Just in slow-mo.
Yes, exactly. Very slow. Is that, you know, if you act to yourself, like if you're kind of like method acting and you kind of go, you know, now you're depressed and you're really sad. Well, maybe a real depressed, you know what I mean? Like if I was really depressed, maybe I would just be here, you know what I mean?
Right,
sort
right.
of thing. But the thing is
that also might be a happy. That might be that, you know, for all we know.
Well, and that's the thing,
because it's a very internal
exactly. And so
storm, right?
The whole point of like acting and animation is that you can get the believable, but it's not just getting the believable. It's about communicating it to the audience. So you have to, acting is the outward representation of an inward reality, right? It's the idea of what's happening inside and how do I portray that to an audience, you know what I mean? And so we have to also kind of, it feels like it's almost like you're playing it up a little bit, but you have to show the audience something, you know what I mean? You have to describe something to them, and I think that's what I just appreciate so much about great actors is that it's just so clear.
No, I know what you mean, because you watch hidden camera footage of a cop show or something, or anything that involves like a courtroom or something, and you see raw emotion, you see real angst or anger or whatever, and then you see Hollywood and you see their depiction of it, and there oftentimes is a pretty stark difference, but it's sort of that marriage, right? That I think maybe is what you're sort of speaking on is making, I guess, what a good actor makes it, like you said, like Daniel Day makes it real, and then that manifests itself, and you hope that it's interesting, you hope that it's something to look at, but more than anything, it's got to be, it's got to really make you believe it, right? So yeah, that's the struggle. That's cool, man. Yeah, absolutely. And so it's I feel that that's cool because you started with Poe on Panda 1, who arguably that character has matured quite a bit, right? From 1 to 3. Like I feel like you can see that difference where
I mean, I think definitely, especially in the second one, in the second Panda, I think second Panda was definitely a little bit more nuanced, because he was kind of, I think, in that semi-transitional phase where
do you guys think you found a better balance by the time you got to the third one?
Yeah, I mean, I think my personal opinion, I didn't work on the third one, so I'm always I'm always like, love the first. The second one, you know, I mean, maybe wasn't what everybody expected, but I thought there was some really good stuff there. And the third one,
I agree with you, by the way, in terms of like the actual whole sandwich. Like I definitely have the first one as like one of my favorite DreamWorks movies and whatnot. So.
Yeah, and I think even to like the outside world, that like, you know, you even have people who are like Pixar fanboys but still love you know, Poe and stuff.
They could admit to liking.
They can at least give us that. But I think by the third one, yes, he was more confident, and he knew who he was a little bit better, because you know, the first one, he's just a fanboy and he has no idea what he's doing, and then it's revealed that he's the Dragon Warrior, and you don't just, and I think that's what was honest about the second one, is that you don't just become that thing when someone awards you something, or you're still you know what I mean? So there has to be a transition period. There has to be a period where you're struggling with these things, you know? And I think it was successful in that sense that by the third you saw that Poe was more confident with who he was and maybe a little bit more bold in some of his decisions and his choices and that sort of thing. And so I think that made a good logical progression. That said, I'm always critical of things.
Sure.
Sometimes I feel there's a lot of decisions that get made over the course of the film, but sometimes I feel like in the movie he's a little bit of a caricature of himself.
Interesting.
There are certain Poe mannerisms that people, I think, played up, and it's not necessarily the animator's fault specifically, but it could have been the director, it could have been anybody. You know what I mean? That I feel like...
Well, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's oh, this will work. This might be too easy of a choice, maybe, versus
It's maybe not as genuine, especially for that moment. You know what I mean? But it's kind of well, Poe does this, or Poe usually holds himself in this way, so yeah, let's just do that. So it ends up feeling... Cliche, but for him, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
interesting.
But that's just my personal feeling.
Well, I know Poe's very near and dear to your heart because you put in so much in that first movie. So
So when I see them mistreating him,
you have to have have an opinion, Ben. Yeah.
You don't know Poe. I know.
I am Poe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But it's true.
Interview over.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. I'm done with this. For me, one of the projects that I learned the most on, I feel like I grew the most, was Rise of the Guardians. I was working on Jack Frost. I was part of the Jack Frost team. I
remember that first sequence. We all sat in the theater and we saw that scene where he rises out of the lake, and that was something to look at, man. That really.
Are you talking about at CTN? Were you?
No. This was just internally. I remember that they gathered. I had just transitioned onto the show, and I remember that they gathered everybody around to see this first reveal of the sequence, and I think that sort of put in everybody's heads oh, we're working on something different. This isn't, in terms of at least animation styling. Yeah. I think I'd come off of Puss in Boots or something, so something a little more stock DreamWorks, but that really made an impression on me. And I thought, wow, look what Ben did. This is this is a different thing. Right?
I think. It was definitely the most difficult character I've ever worked on, and it was the most challenging in a lot of different ways. But I feel like it did help hone me onto what we were talking about just a moment ago, where what matters in the end, because there's and being true to the character, and because you wanted to animate him a little bit more, or you wanted to be a little bit more flourishy with certain things, and not that we were always dialing back, but I think it's one of our more natural animated films.
No, for sure it was. It definitely was.
And so staying true to the style of the film, and staying true to his character and whatnot, but also finding the nuance in that performance, you couldn't move stuff quite as much or as far, because sometimes we can hide behind that, and that's sort of what I was talking about before, where it's well, this character's happy, and it's how do I make them feel happier? It's well, just make the smile bigger, and it's no, it's not.
It's not that simple.
It's not that simple. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's about the timing. It's about the posing. It's a whole number of factors that go into it, and because I think that's what sometimes, especially students, run into, where they're kind of well, I made this. In that particular case, I made the smile bigger, but he doesn't feel any happier, and so you start to realize there's more to the performance than just dialing that up.
I think that's why, as a student anyway, I remember I was encouraged a lot to look at your favorite live action movies, and to any time there's I'm trying to remember the analogy, but they talk about how there was it's almost like you're watching a film and there's these little sweet spots that pop up in your brain. And you got to recognize where those spots are, and then go back and because we have the luxury of digital now, figuring out what did the actor do to sort of display that moment, and that was really educational, because that also cemented the idea that cliche acting versus what's a real moment, right? And that is something that definitely. When I get the chance, up and coming animators, I'm make sure that you don't always fall back to the most obvious thing, and watch live action movies. There's so many good ones out there. So kind of grab from.
If we can just take a moment to like talk some more shit about, for instance, like if I go back to watch, there's a lot of great performances back in like 2D days when Disney was doing, like, for instance, The Little Mermaid. You know, you have such an ideal of it from when you were younger and you watched it, and then I went back to watch it again.
Oh, interesting.
And
okay.
Just looking at it from, you know, now I've got a sharper eye for animation, and like if you go back and look at some of that stuff, like especially the mermaids in the back, it's pretty rough. Like it's some pretty.
It's a pretty. It's
and
a
I
funny,
say that, I try to say that with all humility, in the sense that like I'm not the greatest draftsman in the world, but like in flounder sometimes.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. There's some scenes.
I think that was the growth, like, the growing pains of Disney, because they were coming out of the depths of like the 80s when 2D was sort of dead, and eventually led to like The Hunchback, right? And eventually led to all
that was
those,
like the beginning of that second
right.
Renaissance.
So I think they had a ways to go, but totally. I mean, it's a whole thing now. I mean, I'm sure you see on the internet people like to take in betweens and just sort of focus on them, and you'll have like Belle, whose eyes are firing off different directions, or just like, you know, Ariel's face is just completely warped. So,
and even when it comes to acting, like if you watch Hercules, and it's funny, is like I enjoy the movie Hercules. I really like some of the characters in it, but some of the drawings, or some of the posing, and some of the acting is like. If you listen to the dialogue and like pick out a few scenes where, you know, watch Hercules and some, obviously there's always going to be great moments. You know what I mean? There's always going to be great moments in with this, especially like Little Mermaid with like Glenn Keane and whatnot, or Ursula, anything with Ursula really. Great stuff. But then you're going to occasionally hit scenes where, especially in Hercules, where there were moments that the expression looked kind of wonky or weird, or he didn't look on model, or that the acting choices just didn't fit the dialogue at all. It's like, well, that's kind of a weird thing to gesture, or a weird thing to do for what he's feeling in that moment, you know what I mean? But it's true that it's not just, I'm not just saying don't watch animated films because they're shitty. It's that they're not always the best examples of like what you should do. And also, like what you're saying, like, that especially if we're all watching animated films, we all kind of live in this same like bubble of what good animation is. And I feel like especially you're a great case of that, of someone who doesn't just do the norm, or doesn't just follow whatever. In fact, a lot of times you parody, you know what I mean, like what the norm or the cliche is, and that's good. We need to make sure we don't live in that bubble, so that we're just copying and pasting or just rehashing stuff that we've already done. Right. You know, we need to constantly.
I remember seeing a student demo reel, and first of all, you don't do this, number one. But they basically took. Every shot of their reel was a recreation of a Disney shot in 2D. Yeah. Oh, wow. And they obviously didn't, they didn't tout that on the reel. But I had a friend who knew them at school, and they said, this person just pretty much rotoing Disney shots. Yeah. And it actually did land them a gig.
It did.
But it didn't, like, I don't even know where this person is anymore. But that's probably the worst example of what you're talking about. And it's right, because it's really easy to sort of put, and this is another thing we talk about a lot on Shot Talk, but people start to put animation in its own genre, and you can't see it that way. You have to see it as just a bigger part of like film, right? A bigger part of that whole thing. So, and otherwise you run into the danger of repeating stuff, even stuff that might be good, even shots that were amazing in Little Mermaid. You know, regardless of how bad a lot of that was. There is some brilliant stuff in there, but you don't want to just repeat that. No. You don't want to repeat the good stuff.
And in fact, I feel like especially you can watch a lot of animated films that have come out in the last couple of years, and you can just see this. There's a huge commonality across. They feel very similar to each other. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I mean, Disney has done a really great job. They have really appealing characters, and I think they've told some interesting stories. But like, we're all kind of in this similar like sensibility sort of. I mean, they're just slightly different flavors of things, but it's all the same thing essentially. Right. I remember I took some time off after I think Boss Baby. I took some time off after Boss Baby, and like a month or two. And I remember watching a trailer, I think for Despicable Me 3.
Okay, yeah.
And we watched the trailer, and it was beautiful animation. A lot of it was really, really funny. And but I remember as soon as the trailer finished, I turned to my wife and I was like, I don't think I want to be an animator anymore.
Oh no!
I think because having just a little moment to be, because when I took time off, like I didn't animate, I didn't want like. And truth be told, I don't know if I've seen an animated film for the last 5 or 6 years. Like I've maybe seen clips or things.
Do you think being an animator has a little bit ruined enjoying animation?
I mean, a little bit, because it's kind of like when you know how it's made, you know, how sausage is made, you're kind of like, you know.
You don't want to eat that.
And in fact, sometimes that's a little bit of my trepidation about maybe potentially going into the gaming industry at some point, because I really enjoy playing video games, and I don't want to necessarily know totally how everything is made. You know, even though I have some clue, but
it's like I want to believe David Blaine is Jesus. Or
yes, I would love to. I would love to it'd be so much easier if I. But I think that's what's so important about like I think you had asked me way before, like, certain inspirations and whatnot, and for me, the places I find most inspiration is either maybe in more experimental animation and that sort of thing, or mostly like live action, or even stuff that's kind of, because I feel like even if you watch a little bit more, like just trying to like watch good films, you know what I mean, films that are well done, good acting performances, even if the story doesn't end the way you want it to, or it's not a traditional like, oh, this made me happy, just really trying to appreciate it for what it is and why it gave you. That's one of my favorite things to do is, watch a scene and go, why did it make me feel that way? And then being able to go back to that scene and just watching it.
You know, it's funny,
to dissect that.
Not to get too, out of the realm of animation, but I feel like oftentimes I get a lot of, it feels that like on social media and whatnot, there's a lot of messaging that says, it's almost like anti-feeling. It's almost like, it's almost a little bit coddling, and I think sometimes it's okay to feel uncomfortable about certain things, and it's okay sometimes, even in regards to film, when you watch something that might be off-putting or weird or different, but you know what? It made you, at least the director got you. He was trying to get you to feel a certain way, and he was successful for that. And maybe, like you said, maybe it doesn't wrap up nicely, maybe there's a happy ending, but it was an experience, and it was kind of neat to at least to be open-minded enough to be into that kind of stuff.
Did you ever see No Country for Old Men?
I did.
Back in the day?
Yeah.
So something for me is that I find that whenever I love the film. It's one of my favorite films of all time. It's not one of those films that I feel like you just like rewatch and like, hey, it's a lazy Sunday, I'm just going to put on No Country. No, I've seen it maybe 3 or 4 times. But what I love about that film is that at the end of the film, I think most people who are used to typical movie-going experience go, that's it?
Yeah.
That's where you're going to end it?
Sure.
The bad guy gets into a car accident, sure, but he walks away, and then Tommy Lee Jones talks about a dream he had, you know what I mean? And that's how you end it. And they're kind of like, well, what the hell does that mean? But so usually when I see negative reviews for it, that's where people go like, bunch of people died. It had no real like ending, and that's it. So it's like yeah, sure, it's beautifully crafted, but other than that, but for me, the film, it's all about what they wanted to tell. Like, what was the story they wanted to tell, or what was the moral or the thing that they wanted to describe or put into to talk about in this medium. And to me, the film was a mix of like. There's this conversation Tommy Lee Jones has with his uncle in the film where Tommy Lee Jones is struggling with this idea that like he's getting too old for this, and he feels like bad guys nowadays are just too quick for him, or they can outsmart him, and his uncle kind of goes like, it's not all waiting on you. This isn't about you. This shit was going to happen whether you didn't. It's false to think that you could have made any dent in this, the shittiness or the unpredictability or the chaos of life.
Right.
You know what I mean? He said he eventually says like that's vanity. Yeah. To think that you can do something about it, even though it doesn't necessarily feel like vanity, because you're really caring about trying to stop some of this senseless killing, but also the whole film itself represents this kind of chaos in a lot of different ways, because all the different people that die in different ways or through different, like one cop was doing his job and arrested him and got killed. You got another person who was like just a store clerk and he was just there and a random customer, this bad guy came in and, or one person was a wife of somebody, who did something wrong. So it's like everybody a lot of people met their ends in different ways, and it doesn't make any sense.
But that's maybe the idea they wanted to get across, is
exactly.
that sometimes senseless things happen, and
Absolutely.
people try to figure out what they could have done differently, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even Tommy Lee Jones's little talk about at the end, the dream he talks about is how he's in this snowy forest, a mountain. He's in this mountain pass with his father, and his father's got this like blanket over him, and then at a certain point, his father just goes on ahead of him in the pass as it's snowing, and he goes off into the dark. And Tommy didn't feel abandoned, but what he did feel is that my father has gone up ahead, and I know that as soon as I make my way over this pass, he'll be waiting for me with a fire there, preparing a place for me.
Yeah.
And it's in the sense that death is like a constant for everybody.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That it will end there.
Yeah.
And it's kind of almost like the great equalizer, of everything. But also that we need to live in this tension of that life is chaotic, and living because it's not comfortable, because we want so badly, and I think that's why you see now we're heading off into like religion.
Yeah,
so that's fine. So like that's why I think a lot of people get so overzealous about religion, like fundamentalists and more extreme viewpoints on religion, because we want so badly to make sense of this world. And that's why, I think we're into storytelling and that sort of thing, because storytelling is all about us trying to make sense of our world and our lives and all that kind of stuff. And we want to feel like we have a grasp of what's right, what's wrong, like what's going on.
A little bit of control, a little bit of control, right?
Because if we realize that it's all chaos, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's an incredible amount of anxiety.
Yeah,
and it's a hard place to live.
Yeah.
But I think in a funny way, it's a truthful place to live.
Sorry, I was going to say, that's a really cool interpretation of, and I think it's probably a pretty accurate one of No Country for Old Men, because I remember that the feeling of that movie more than anything else.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe it was very deliberate for them to say, we just wanted to push this button, and then this sort of last half of the film, that open-endedness of it, then leads into what you're talking about right now.
Oh yeah, like I try to imagine making a film that describes this kind of like esoteric idea, this kind of like vague, not a vague idea, but it's like, how do you represent that in a film?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because even
you got 2 hours.
Exactly. Yeah, you got 2 hours now. Well, I always laugh because my wife was a painting major, and at one point the teacher was like, paint irony, and they're like, you know what I mean? So it's like the idea is like, how do we tell these very like ephemeral things? How do we describe them, or at least communicate that feeling? You know what I mean? Even if we don't literally tell someone what we think about it, how do we portray that feeling? Even the fact that they killed the main character like 2/3 of the way through the film and then finished it, because like Tommy Lee Jones isn't necessarily a main character, because like you could go like, oh well, he's there through the whole film. He's just more of like a narrator. Like he's just more talking about what's happening in the film. And the bad guy is clearly not the main character. He was clearly the antagonist of the thing. So, but the fact that they killed that main character, and not only that, they don't even really show his face. So it's like you've been with him for like an hour and a half, and then when he dies, it's not the bad guy that kills him; it's the Mexicans.
Right.
It's like the other group that's going after him, and you don't see his face, and there's no real closure there. And even that to me is beautiful in the sense that is purposeful. You know what I mean? They purposely didn't show you his face. They purposely didn't conclude him in a satisfying way that maybe a typical movie would, to further push home the idea of this senselessness, or chaos of life. I thought it was just
that's cool though. And yeah, you're right. Going back to what you said about storytelling, that it is oftentimes why sometimes in a I don't know. I guess I don't know if America's ever been as agnostic or as it is right now, but sometimes people need to cling on to something like a simple story to derive any sort of like meaning or any sort of like guidelines for like, what am I supposed to be doing? How does this work? Like how does this all come together? So Ben, let's shift.
Yes, absolutely.
Remember once upon a time you decided to participate in a marathon, and I thought, I'm going to be right there with you. I'm not actually going to sign up, but I'm going to do the training. Because that sounds kind of neat. So yeah, I remember we used to spend, we'd go to Griffith Park with Chris Kirschbaum and Mike Stern, and we would be out there. And I remember you were sort of leading that whole pack for building up to the 26.3 miles, I think it was.
26.2.
26.2 miles.
I think, yeah.
But yeah, there's this sort of this fabled story that we have now, which
Huerta Pass is I think what we call it.
Okay, I forgot that detail. Yeah.
Describing it for the audience that so Rodrigo, we were training for I think up to 4 months. I don't know when you joined us. I don't know if you were with us for the full 4 months or not. But then when it came the day of the marathon that we were actually training for, because it was Stern and I think it was for the San Diego Rock and Roll Marathon.
Yeah.
And obviously, since you and Kirschbaum, I think, had either failed to sign up in time or you just decided not to. I
was doing it for the sheer exercise.
That's
and
the pure. Like I love the purity of
like
I'm doing it to get like a participation medal. You're doing it just for the pure.
I'm giving myself a medal. Yes.
Exactly. And so on the day of the race, Stern and I are down in San Diego. Rodrigo and Kirschbaum are still here in LA, but you decide to run the full 26.2 through Griffith Park and through that whole little loop.
No, see, I thought we were. No, it was just a training day. It was actually because I remember.
I don't think I was there.
You weren't out there?
No. That's why I had heard about this story. Maybe you're so delusional from
maybe because I lost half my
the impression,
function.
The way I remember it is that at least it was Kirschbaum's retelling was that.
Okay. He's probably right. So anyways, continue, sorry.
Both of you were running, and I think you were around like 18 miles in or something like that. And that's usually when people hit the wall in the marathon, around 17
Yeah, we're coming around the bend, around the Warner lot, sort of near that area.
Like Barham and then hooking around to like Riverside or whatever it was. And I guess there was a Taco Bell or whatever. You had, I think, hit your limit the way I understand it.
I remember that you'd feed us these little beans sometimes to sort of
the
help us
belly.
Replenish our energy.
Yes.
But I did notice for myself that sometimes it felt like I don't know if it's because the blood went rushed to my stomach and all of a sudden I felt kind of a little bit laggy over it. But anyways, I had gotten to the habit of just drinking water in the morning and going out and running fucking 22 miles or whatever. But we came around that bend, and
it was a hot day.
It was a hot day. It was a hot day. And I just realized that all of a sudden the lights were getting dark. You know what I mean? So as we're coming around, I just
It's just you and Kirschbaum, right?
Just me and Kirschbaum, and I very matter of factly, just because there was nothing else except for the facts, telling them, I don't think I'm going to finish this, and. I
like how straightforward you were.
And I think you should go get the car, and I'll wait for you.
And I have to just sit down now.
And that must have been a pretty severe, it must have been a pretty solemn, severe way of doing it because he didn't ask questions.
And he was still like 6 miles from the car, so 4 to 6 miles.
He still had a way to go, And I thought, well, I don't want to die, and I feel like I am, so I need to figure this out really quickly. And yes,
it's real survival mode at that point.
It is survival mode. So thank God in heaven that across the street was this shining beacon of Taco Bell, my saving grace. I run across, and the thing about running the 22 or what we were 18 miles in, we started at Griffith Park, so there's a bunch of like dust and horse manure and like it all gets kicked up.
You're like drenched.
You look like hell.
Yeah.
So I remember going across.
You were a sweater, if I recall.
I am a sweater. I'm sweating right now.
I am too.
And I remember going across and walking into the Taco Bell. And with the same severity that I spoke with Chris, I just go up. I had nothing, by the way. I had
you had no money, no
wallet, no
ID,
cell phone,
right?
or no nothing. I had nothing on me. And so I walk in, and I'm realizing that I'm a beggar at this point. But I didn't care at that point because I just wanted to not die. And I go up and I say, "Can I have a taco?" And I'm again
pale, probably
pale, smelled like horse shit. You can imagine the picture that it was. She didn't. She just looked at me like I was a ghost. She walks to the back of the Taco Bell and she goes, "Here." I go, "Thank you." I don't remember eating it.
It was one. She gave you a taco though, right? That's what it was.
She gave me a taco. Like she understood. I think she read between the lines.
Yes.
And I went out.
She figured it out. She put the dots together.
So I ended up taking that, going outside, and just remember. Waking up.
I think Kirschbaum found you by the little like.
I found shade. I remember having enough brain activity to be like, I should not pass out in the sun. That'd be really bad at
die
this
of
point.
exposure.
Yes. So I woke up and there was Kirschbaum, my shining armor.
And I think he said he found you sort of slouched over. by that like half wall, the concrete like half wall that's over there, and thankfully he was able to. I don't know if he had smelling salts. He was able to revive you and bring you back into the car, and I loved hearing that story because it was just I knew that was who you are, is that you would go until you would reach that point, and in which case it was a very matter of fact, like, if I continue, I'm going to die.
Well, Ben, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for
having me.
We
got into some pretty interesting territory, and I always like to explore things with creative people. So thank you so much for your time and for being here.
Thank you.
And yes, so we will see you all next time on Shot Talk.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Shot Talk and would like to see more episodes in the future, please consider contributing to the Shot Talk Patreon. You can sign up today at patreon.com/ShotTalk. There are all types of rewards, like receiving episodes early, access to private Discord servers, and more. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.